And welcome to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. For the next hour, we're going to break down UFC 288. Yep, the king is back. Henry Cejudo going to try to reclaim his bantamweight belt against Aljamain Sterling, the current champion in the bantamweight division. We did see another bantamweight bout this past weekend. A bit of a surprise for some of the betting market as Song Yadong does get the quote-unquote upset victory, but these are, we believe, the very two best 135-pounders on the planet in Aljo and Henry Cejudo. So to talk more about that, and the man that sets those numbers right behind me here that you see at Circus Sportsbook, he is Nick Kalikas. You can follow him as I do at Fight Odds. Nick, always great to catch up with you, and I am fascinated every time I walk into Circa, and certainly for the last month or so, ever since the numbers have been going up for this fight. When you got a guy like Cejudo coming off a massive layoff, haven't seen him in forever, against the current champion Aljamain Sterling, I've noticed that your numbers have fluctuated here. What did you open those numbers at, and where have you seen the money come in the last weeks and months?
Yeah, no doubt. What an interesting fight, man. I'm so glad Cejudo decided to come back, and he had so much room left, you know what I mean, as far as his abilities and his championship caliber that he's got. I did open the line a little bit higher than most. It was minus 130, plus 110 at the time for Cejudo, and we got some sharp action immediately that came in and pounced on Sterling. Like you said, man, I mean, there's a lot of question marks surrounding Cejudo right now, and a lot of it is because of the time off. We're just not 100% sure that he's going to be back in form once, you know, like he was a few years back.
And he does have a 7-inch reach disadvantage. We don't expect this necessarily to be a fight that stays on the feet. We're expecting both these guys eventually to get down to the mat and see what plays out there. So you mentioned that layoff, 36-33 for Aljo here. And I even saw it here at Circa get up to $1.20 and back down today to $1.15, where we see the current price. Is it almost like once the public feels like they get a good number on Aljo, you're seeing them pounce on it?
Yeah, especially, I mean, he's been performing amazing, really. Even in the rematch with Jan, I mean, the game plan that he had going into that fight, you got to respect him. I mean, a lot of people were definitely counting him out, and he performed over expectation. So he is definitely deserving holding that strap and is one of the best bantamweights in the world for sure. So the public is going to, anytime you see a plus number on somebody of that caliber, it's hard not to kind of pounce that way, right? But again, Cejudo, the way they match up against each other, I think Cejudo is actually the better mixed martial artist. So I think you're going to see a case of a lot of sharps and a lot of early action coming in on Sterling, but a lot of people are going to wait and pounce. The bigger action is going to come in on Cejudo, I think, by fight day.
Let's talk a little bit about the total here. And right now you can understand with these guys in a 5-round main event, and we know they're pedigree, and once they get down to the ground, and certainly Aljo was on the ground and pound and wrestling, he has Cejudo, you mentioned it here, so well respected in the betting market for the different ways he might be able to get you out if it gets down to the ground. You can understand why now it's minus $1.60 here, juiced to the over 4.5. Do you see finishing potential here for these guys? And I wonder if these numbers you think are going to change before we get to Saturday night.
Yeah, I was just glancing at the down bet screen, looking at the market prices that are out there right now. And yeah, I do think that most people are going to like the over in this spot, but I do think there's finishing potential, honestly. I mean, Cejudo, if he's able to stuff the takedowns and not let Sterling backpack him, then I think Sterling in round possibly 4 and 5 is going to be exhausted. We know that Cejudo's striking is on point. He's got finishing ability for sure. So I think there's a possible finish for Cejudo late, or if Sterling's able to get on Cejudo's back, I mean, his submission skill is so good that we can see him possibly sinking that rear naked choke and end it as well. So I think it depends on whose fighting style works best in this matchup, but we could definitely see it go under. For me, I would not lay the chalk on the over. I think more people are wanting to go that way because they think this is just going to be an all-out war, but I can see a finish for sure going under.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I tweeted out after we had Henry on our show here on VSiN a couple weeks ago, you know, everybody's got a plan, as the old Mike Tyson saying, until you get punched in the face. And then Aljo tweeted back at me, Nick, and said, everybody has got a plan until I backpack them. And I'm like, oh, I'm not getting in the middle of this. You guys got to do the fighting here. But that does lead you to possibly, when you look at Aljo and some of the props there, submission is plus 350, KO, TK, or DQ, the longer shot there at 8-1. If you want to pick a method of victory for Aljo, do you look at the sub and say that's the best way to go?
I mean, I think it's the most realistic way to go for him, but you can't count out his KO TKO. Plus 800, 8-1 is definitely intriguing there. But he's so long, and you know what? If he goes up the middle with those knees and you know, times his punches and strikes well, I mean, Cejudo is the smaller fighter. He's going to be rushing into time, so I could see it kind of ending by knockout too. So I'm not counting Sterling out. I think a lot of people discredit his striking. It's gotten a lot better than it used to be. So I think he continues to evolve as a fighter. But again, submission should be the narrative. That if he's going to win this fight and it's going to be a finish, more than likely it's going to be that 3-1 price tag you want to take at this point.
Absolutely. There are certainly different ways to handicap the market. It is fascinating for the guy with the 7-inch reach advantage that he's 8-1 on that prop, and the guy with the shorter arms and Henry Cejudo is plus 350, and the guy going up from 125 to 135. That is wild to me when you look at those numbers. I want to get to the co-main event here, and it's a Chicago fighter here in Belal Muhammad that's going to go up against the Brazilian. We just saw Gilbert Burns in there and kind of retire. Jorge Masvidal looked really good in getting that done here. It's a short turnaround now for Gil against a guy like Belal that we know he's going to want to wrestle. So only 3 rounds to get this work done. Do you look at it here? And I'm a little bit surprised that it's, dare I say, only $1.25 for Gil. Do you worry that he hasn't had the full camp? It's a quick turnaround. You just were in there. Maybe it wasn't the most taxing fight here. But which way do you think these numbers might go before we get to Saturday?
Well, I mean, the public overall and the action, some sharp action as well, is gobbling up the Belal price at the plus money for sure, because the market opened around minus 200-ish, if I'm not mistaken, for Burns, and it's dropped significantly to now what you're seeing is what, about $1.25, $1.30-ish out there. So it's not really a big number anymore. It's more of a pick'em type of fight. So the plus money did get gobbled up on Belal, and I think it probably does favor him. I know that Gilbert Burns was just in there, like we said, a month ago, but getting into 2 camps right away, I mean, back to back like he's doing, immediately going back. I think he's a professional fighter, meaning that he does everything the right way, especially as of late. The last few years, I'm really amazed with his progression. I mean, even outside of the cage, the professionalism that he showed. So I think he's going to be ready, but it's still kind of taxing on your body mentally, physically like that. And again, the other side of it, we know that Belal's coming in off of Ramadan too. So that's never easy, to make the sacrifices those guys make. So this is definitely a fight, and it is 5 rounds. That's right. Another factor that you got to, put in here, because typically speaking, Burns does tend to fade. So I think when people found out it was a 5-round fight, the action started coming in more on Belal because they think it does favor him a little bit more. So it's definitely a head scratcher. I personally feel like Burns is the better fighter in this matchup, but it's going to be a tough matchup.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because again, I stand corrected. Like, you look at it and you go, wait, it's a non-title fight, right? Because Leon Edwards is still the champion here at 170 pounds, but they have made this a 5-round non-title co-main event. Very rare that you see these in the UFC. And there it is again, juiced at minus $1.50. And I think you just nailed it on the head. Because if you've just been in there a month earlier, Belal's got a very grinding style, not known for his hands. That's why you see plus 450 here as the KO, TKO, or DQ prop, and that he would want to take this into deeper waters. Ironically, you would think Belal would be the guy that would want to try to make this a longer fight. Is that the method of victory that you would see? And that's why maybe 2-1 for decision would feel like the likelier spot here if you want to back Belal Muhammad.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen in the past from Burns, though, his chin at times has been a little suspect. So I wouldn't necessarily count Belal out on the feet if this goes 5-2. I think he's going to have his moments, and he cracks pretty hard. Yep. I mean, that Brady fight, I don't think is what you're kind of used to and what you're expecting from Belal, the finishing ability that had in that fight. But that being said, again, Burns hasn't had that chin check before, so it's a little bit of a concern there. But I do think that Burns is going to look for those takedowns, Belal is going to look for those takedowns, get top position on Burns. And if he maintains top position, I think he's a good enough fighter and savvy enough on the ground to survive that. Burns, of course, if he gets top position, you're in some serious trouble. Or if he gets your back, you're in some serious trouble. So Belal wants to definitely wrestle in this spot, take him down. But I think he's going to be okay even if it hits the feet or stays up for a long period of time as well. So I don't think he's a fish out of water either way. Yeah,
that's really going to be a fascinating co-main event there. And those numbers, I'm sure, are going to fluctuate here before we get to Saturday. And it is fascinating. Again, a non-title fight here at 5 rounds potentially here, juiced to the over at minus $1.50. When I look at Jessica Andrade, former champion, obviously against Jan here. And Jan is a big dog here, Nick, plus $1.70. I'm seeing with Jessica here, almost a $2 betting favorite. What do you make of this one? Could be a very exciting women's fight here. And again, maybe we got the prospects of some finishing potential whenever you have Jessica Andrade inside the octagon.
For sure. And we're getting bet on Andrade. That's why you're seeing the line climb a little bit too. So there is some sharp action and public action coming in that way. And it's not surprising. Andrade has been such a good fighter. I mean, she's one of the best female fighters on the planet. She's been for a long time. But I do think if this fight stays standing, she's going to be in for it. I mean, Jan has been fighting at a nasty pace, and she's got some striking skill and ability to finish fights on the feet as well. So I think if she avoids the takedown here, I think it's going to be a live dog situation. So it's dog or pass for me. I would not lay the chalk where it is right now.
And it's also fascinating because normally when you look at a lot of women's fights that are only 3 rounds, that total is going to be a 2.5, and it is. And it is juiced to the over, but not dramatically. To your point, Nick, that this is going to have the possibility here, plus money of under 2.5. So it feels like both ladies, if it stays standing, it could be a slugfest that we see in the pocket.
100%. And then you got to factor in, I mean, it could go under because if Andrade gets on top, it's just, she starts raining down some serious punishment. I think she could finish on the ground too. So that's why the total is a little bit not what you're typically seeing in, a lot of these ladies' bouts. So there is a finishing potential. I think Jan can finish on the feet, or Andrade could possibly finish on the feet, or maybe on the ground. But Jan, at that price, man, definitely tempting.
Very quickly, when you go through this card, Nick, and obviously when you have a pay-per-view card like this, you're going to have some really juicy fights. You look at Drew Dober in there against Matt Frevola. You've got Gracie is in there, Choice Jordan. Is there another fight right now that you might expect to see a lot of line move before we get to Saturday?
I mean, scanning through this, I think that we're going to see some probably more action. Like you mentioned, the Frevola-Dober fight. I think that's kind of one of the fights of the night for a lot of the fans out there. I mean, we know that Dober hits like a truck. Frevola's chin is a little bit suspect, but Frevola can also game plan right. And if he survives, the initial onslaught, I think, from Dober and gets some takedowns, he's got a path to victory as well. So we're seeing two-way sharp action on this fight, and it's starting to kind of drop as we go. So I think we're going to see more sharp action come in on the Frevola side.
Nick, do great work at ESPN. Great work here at Circus, setting those numbers. Really appreciate your information as always, my friend. Enjoy UFC 288. Just getting it started. First Strike here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you plenty of ways to bet the UFC. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. You're going to be able to bet more than just the main event. DraftKings has great odds on fight lines, total rounds, and futures for all MMA events. There are eligibility restrictions. They do apply, so see DraftKings.com/sportsbook for all the terms and conditions. We roll on this edition of First Strike UFC 288. It is always great to have Dan Vreeland join the program. Of course, Dan is the hardest working man in MMA, writer at Gambling Podcast, Cage Side Press, host of Top Turtle MMA and SGPN MMA. Dan, great to have you back in the program, my friend. I like to start off the question each and every week with you. When you have a pay-per-view like this, okay, and you can choose to watch any fight as a fan, and the best one that you see wagering potential on, which one intrigues you the most, either just from a fan's perspective and then from a gambling perspective?
So I'm going to stick on the prelims for both of them. I actually think the most exciting fight to watch on this whole card is Drew Dober versus Matt Frevola. Those two dudes are just going to go in and swing them, and I'm going to love watching every second of it. It seems like neither guy, with the exception of the one time that Matt Frevola got stung by Terrence McKinney, it seems like neither guy can really get knocked out. So I'm loving watching that. And my favorite fight to bet on here, I love Ikram Aliskerov. He's fighting Phil Hawes. His number has been right around -200 all week. It's actually dropped a little bit in some places that I've seen, down to like -210. I can't believe he's betting off at this. This is a guy who's only really lost to Khamzat Chimaev. He looked incredible on the Contender Series. He's got a great gas tank, great wrestling. I think he's going to manhandle Phil Hawes in there, and I think getting it at that price is insane.
So that could be a good parlay builder here if you don't want to lay the 210 we're seeing today, but really good astute information there. And again, that's where a number doesn't even feel that too big for you right now. I want to get back to the Dober fight against Matt the Steamroller Frevola here. And you mentioned normally these guys, they're going to throw for the fences. And in a potential 3-round fight, the total here, Dan, is just set at 1.5. And it's not out of whack here. -$1.35 for the over round and a half. If you want to bet the under, you do get small plus money at +$1.05. Are you leaning towards the over, thinking that the chins can hold up for, let's say, 7.5 minutes at least?
I am. And not only am I leaning that way on the over for that reason, but also because I think that both of these guys would probably do themselves a really good service to wrestle a little bit. I know Matt Frevola he's gotten away from that in his last few fights. And once you feel that power in his hands, you get why he's gone away from it. But he is actually a phenomenal wrestler. He's a great grappler. And I think just doing that to Drew Dober would do enough to open up his striking. And we even saw Drew Dober do that a little bit in the Bobby Green fight. He worked his wrestling. He worked his cage clinch up against the wall. So I think if either of them work a little bit of clinching, work a little bit of grappling in there, I think you're going to see the 1.5 go over pretty easily. And I think even if one of them gets stung and is wobbly a little bit, you're going to see him clinch up and try to work some of that wrestling to save themselves some time. So, I like the over in this one quite a bit.
Can we get crazy and not pick a winner and just say that it hits the judges' cards and get plus 250? Can it really go all 15?
I don't know if it could go all 15. I think these guys hit too hard for me to really comfortably take the over. But I will say, if you want to pick a side here, I think you have to bet the Matt Frevola side. And I'm not saying that Drew Dober can't win this fight or Drew Dober, shouldn't win this fight. But we were just talking about Ikram Aliskerov at negative 210, right? Or right around that number. Drew Dober's over that number. And we're talking about this being a slugfest and a fight that is, razor close in terms of margin. I don't know how you don't wind up on the Matt Frevola side at almost plus $2 in not pick him because if you're gonna bet a side on this one, it's got to be Matt Frevola. There's too much value there.
It does have fight of the night written all over it, so that could be one of the most intriguing fights of the night. But you like it to go a little bit longer than most people might think. Whenever you see a Gracie on the card, my eyes light up, and I see Kron right now is plus $1.55 here against Charles Jourdain. What do you make of that matchup here? And again, you don't think of Gracie's in hands. You think of it, wow, this thing gets down to the mat, and that's where things can get a little bit crazy. What do you make of this matchup here as a dog?
Well, so this is so interesting to me because he's been away for 3.5 years, right? And when we saw Kron Gracie, the first thing he did was he got Alex Caceres right to the mat, submitted him in almost no time. He followed that up by fighting Cub Swanson and had that fight where he couldn't get into the mat, and man, did he look like a fish out of water. So you got him here now against Charles Jourdain, somebody who, again, loves to strike, but has actually had a little bit of trouble with the takedown defense. If you want to go back to his fight with Shane Burgos, not a guy I think of as being a wrestler.
No.
Shane Burgos got him down a couple of times. Not only got him down, but a couple of times Charles Jourdain overextended himself, and Shane Burgos actually worked right to the back. And that, to me, is a really ugly sign when you're going to fight somebody like Kron Gracie. And in addition to that, 3.5 years away might be alarming for some people, but Kron Gracie knew that he had a hole in his game, right? It was his wrestling side of his game. He knew he had the jiu-jitsu takedowns. He knows he's got the jiu-jitsu game. He's got the top control. He's got all that kind of stuff. He needed to work a little bit on his hands and his wrestling. And there's no way to know what he did in that 3.5 years, but I have to think he came away with, at least some double leg, at least some sort of single leg, run the pipe situation. I think he's going to come back a lot better version of himself. And really all he needs is one takedown here against Charles Jourdain. And I think at this price, it's worth testing that out. I went to look at props to see if Kron Gracie by submission looked any nicer. It doesn't look much nicer. It's basically his win number. But you could probably get like an extra, plus 50 on that.
Yeah.
You might get, which isn't a lot, but like if he's going to win, that's probably how he's going to win.
Yeah.
So,
They're not giving us free candy on that one, Dan. I was thinking exactly the way you were, right? If it's going to be Kron, it's going to be by submission 2-1. So you're right. You might get a little bit better value, but the books, they certainly know what his ground game looks like if this fight hits the ground. I'm so intrigued by so many of these fights, Dan, because this feels like a real, if you're a fan of the UFC and certainly MMA, there's so many deep fights on the undercard here. I look at Marina Rodriguez against Verna Jandiroba here, and Rodriguez, small favorite at minus $1.40. What do you make of that matchup? Because that one, to me, is sneaky intriguing.
Yeah, it is sneaky intriguing, and it seems like you just dotted every single one on this card that I like the underdog on, because I actually don't like a lot of underdogs on this card, but Verna Jandiroba is actually one of the underdogs I like on this one. When you look at Marina Rodriguez, she has done some really great things on the feet, right? Like, I love her boxing. The fact that she has worked. I mean, look back at the Mackenzie Dern fight. She looked great on the feet in that fight. But since then, we have actually seen some real issues with her grappling. You look at the fight with Yan Xiaonan, who's actually going to be on the main card here. Yan Xiaonan, kind of a boxer with shorter range, And still, she found her way in and into some takedowns there. And that really alarms me against somebody like Virna Jandiroba, who isn't going to be as good with the hands. But man, is she a tough out when she's on top of you. And we've seen it time and time again with Jandiroba. Once she gets you down and once she's on top of you, she's got sneaky good submissions. And she's run through a couple of people that way. I think as long as she gets Marina Rodriguez up against the cage a couple of times, I think she's going to get those takedowns. And I would not be surprised to see her either snatch a submission here or steal one on the judges' scorecards just based on the control alone.
Yeah, it's amazing that when Rodriguez fought Mackenzie Dern, that was a main event, right? They were the headliners. This is how good this card is that you see her here in the prelims. Very quickly on those prelims here, when you look at Kennedy Nchukwu at a $2 betting favorite, Chaos Williams is a $3 betting favorite. Do you like both of those favorites there, or do you think there's any live dog scenarios in their matchups?
I think, Devin Clark is probably a little bit closer to being a live dog against Kennedy Nzechukwu. I think I'm still going with Kennedy in that one, mostly just because if you've seen his development in his last couple of fights down at Fortis MMA, a place that definitely has worked the wrestling game of a lot of people. He's actually shown up with a little bit better wrestling in the last couple of fights. The fight with Carl Roberson sticks out. He was really able to offensively wrestle in that fight. And against Kudalaba, he did enough defensive wrestling to get the job done there too. So against somebody like Devin Clark, I think his striking's better, his range is better. And as long as his wrestling holds up, he should win pretty easily here. Again, I think Devin Clark's a little bit more live than Rolando Bedoya is, because Bedoya, for me, he's one of those newcomers that they signed, and I got burnt by one last weekend, so I won't say too much about those newcomers that they signed. But he's one of those guys who he looks really good when he's knocking people out. But when he's not knocking people out, he looks pretty darn bad. And with Chaos Williams, I think if you're going to stand in front of that guy for a while, you're not going to last very long, because Chaos Williams hits really hard too. And I think he's just a little bit more nuanced in the feet. And also, we've been talking about wrestling. Chaos Williams, sneaky good wrestling too. He's worked at a couple of takedowns in his last couple of fights and really made it a little bit more of a complete fighter. So I think he could definitely take down Bedoya there too, even if he's not getting what he wants on the feet.
Dan, we only have a minute to go. Main event time. The numbers been moving a little bit here in the last couple of weeks. What do you make of the King's return? Henry Cejudo, 3 years of layoff to try to take the strap now from Aljo.
Look, I'm done doubting Aljamain Sterling. I've done it more than once in that fight with Piotr Jan, especially the second one. Made it so that I'll probably never doubt him again, because look, he looked phenomenal on the feet. The development in his game on the feet under Ray Longo is clearly a big part of his game. And I just don't know that somebody is going to step in to the cage off of the layoff that Henry Cejudo has been on and take it to him. So I'm going to go with the champ here. I think this is a razor close fight, super exciting. And also, I just think we'll know enough about Cejudo probably 5 minutes in to know how this one's going to end.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. Look, I've been on the right side of a couple of those Cejudo matchups with Jan, and the wrong side against Sandhagen. So I'm right there with you. I've doubted him at my own peril as well. Great stuff as always. Give him a follow on Twitter at Gumby Vreeland, one of the best in the biz. Still got much more to get to. Don't go anywhere. First Strike returns right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We have sprung into May, so you can bet on baseball this season with 24/7 streaming, daily best bet emails, including advice, data, and strategy for just $9.99. We're getting ready for the golf's second major of the year. You know that means that our guys like Wes Reynolds and Matt Newmans and Matt Brown, they're going to have every player in the field all discussed. Plus, we got the Kentucky Derby. So sign up today to get full access to VSiN, where all you need to be covered for just $9.99 at VSiN.com/subscribe. Back here on First Strike, and I always love catching up with our next guest, Reed Kuhn. You can follow him as I do at Fightnomics. He is the author of a book of the same name. And Reed, inside school here, you put out a tweet yesterday kind of breaking down the main event, and it just got me so excited to talk to you today, as I do each and every week, because I'm so confused by this main event. When you got a guy like Henry Cejudo coming off a 3-year layoff against the current champ and Aljamain Sterling. Aljo tweeted at me a couple weeks ago about I'm going to backpack him. I'm like, man, that's my name's Paul. That's between y'all. What are the numbers showing you when you got a guy like Cejudo now at 135 off the layoff against the current king of the division?
Yeah, there's some good give and take here. And again, we have a situation where I've backed both guys. And so it hurts a little bit to be forced to pick against one of them. But the numbers back up what Aljamain Sterling actually said. He spends a disproportionate amount of time on the mat backpacking people. And that is a number I actually look at. I don't normally put it out, in the data, but it is something that sticks out. And that's very different from Cejudo. Cejudo is a top control guy. He works from usually full guard, puts people down, and then works from there, ground and pound. But Sterling is much more about transitions, scrambles, and submit, and just the control time that he gets, going around and making everything difficult to deal with. And that's just one of those guys. Cejudo is just more of a traditional wrestler. So that's what we're going to get. And when you look at the stand-up, there's a similar stylistic contrast. While they might look similar in terms of accuracy or pace, very big size discrepancy.
Yes.
Cejudo made his name at flyweight, and now he's fighting a rangier bantamweight, and just stylistically very different. Sterling is very much a high volume, long range guy. Cejudo is more of a counter striker, and he's trying to lull you in and get that inside boxing. And so that's what makes this confusing. You're not alone. This is a tough one. The market still can't figure it out. Clearly Sterling opens as a favorite, and then it just tanks from there. And now we've got to pick them. Maybe even Cejudo's going to close as the favorite. So throw all that out the window. You've also got a layoff to deal with, and Cejudo now being on the wrong side of 35. The numbers still like Sterling. And I think that he has been undervalued multiple times in the past. He's come through for me. I am going to take a small stab on him. I love it if I'm getting even money or plus money, but it's going to be a tricky matchup to watch.
It really is. And Reed, I'm glad I'm not the only one confused. And I look at the total here, and obviously you can understand here we're in a bantamweight weight class, lighter weight class, 135. So we understand why at 4.5 it is juiced right now at minus $1.60. Are you seeing finishing potential? And what really is just almost counterintuitive to me is Cejudo is actually the shorter number on the KO, TKO, or DQ prop at plus 350. Aljo's got a 7-inch reach advantage. And yeah, we think of him as a backpacker and somebody that's going to wrestle first. But to me, if he gets you down and hurts you, he could finish you on the ground with ground and pound. Is there finishing potential that the numbers are showing?
There is, but I agree with the way those lines are coming out because Cejudo is the bigger knockout threat. He has 5 knockdowns. Sterling has 0, and Sterling has been dropped 4 times. If anybody's going to get dropped on their feet, it's probably Sterling. And so that does support Cejudo as a long shot for a knockout. But Sterling has been in there against dangerous strikers. He's survived. He knows how to stay out of trouble. Aside from one fluky flying knee that he took, he has survived a lot of those situations where he's been in trouble. And so that's what does give me a little bit more faith in leveraging that reach advantage. On the ground, the finishing potential does go to Sterling. He's going to be the one who's flipping around in positions and putting Cejudo in tricky spots, like maybe setting up a submission. But generally speaking, this definitely takes a while to develop, at least 2-3 rounds. And that I sometimes take a more conservative approach on the totals because you never know what's going to happen in round 4 or 5. Someone's cut, someone's gassed, a finish could happen. But I like to be more conservative. I don't see it ending in the first 2 or 3. So I might go like a 3.5 over.
All right, yeah. And right now, by the way, for Aljo prop on the sub, it's plus 350 if you think it might take that time. But I'm picking up what you're putting down there. It might be one that goes longer into the night. When I look at the co-main, again, I'm fascinated. Gilbert Burns, to me, is one of those best 170-pounders, and we understand, he's kind of been left out of the conversation a little bit. Belal Muhammad's a guy that feels like he's always left out of the title consideration. It does feel like a title eliminator here to maybe get a shot at Leon Edwards at this weight. We just saw Gil in there. He retired, Jorge Masvidal, about a month ago down there in Miami. Small favorite, quick turnaround here, minus $1.25. And oddly, this is potentially a 5-round matchup in a non-title bout. I know you have a lot of data on this, guys. What are the numbers showing you?
Well, they show that Burns is the more dangerous guy. Now, Muhammad has gotten by because he is another guy who can backpack people. He can wrestle and he can jab. But when it comes to finishing potential, it's definitely Burns. Burns has the heavier hands. Muhammad has been dropped 6 times, 0 knockdowns to his credit. Burns has also been dropped a lot of times, 7 in fact, but he has more knockdowns scored. So in terms of power, definitely go with Burns here. And on the ground, similar story. Burns is much more about the dangerous submissions. Muhammad is much more about position control. So we do have a total stylistic mismatch here. It's similar to the main event in that respect. But I got to respect Burns' level of competition a little more so than Muhammad. Now, I understand the win streak, but you look at someone like Tony Ferguson, for example, who put together an amazing win streak, but it was always those middle of the pack guys where Burns has been going out, taking title shots, fighting the elite. I do respect his strength of schedule just a little bit more. And although the line should be close, this is not a huge lean or anything, especially just coming off another fight. I do worry a little bit about Burns' gas tank, but I do lean Burns this way. I think he might even test the chin of Muhammad. Hopefully it doesn't turn into him gassing in the rounds like 4 or 5.
And that leads me to the total here, Reed, and exactly astute observation there. If Gilbert Burns, because he just fought, hasn't had a full camp, you think he might get into a faster pace early on. Is there finishing potential? Right now, the under is plus money for 4.5 rounds.
I do think there is for Burns, and this is one where you pick the scenario. If your scenario is that Burns is going to win and you're going to give me nearly 2-to-1 value on a finish, I like that play. If it's the other scenario, if it's Muhammad playing his game, top control, jab game, then it definitely goes to a decision. I don't see Muhammad getting a finish here. So you're going to pick a side and you're going to pick the outcome and you're going to pair them together depending on which way you're going. I'm going Burns. I would probably go under as well. All
right, correlated play possibly there for Gilbert Burns. Let's get to some other fights that I know your data has already given you some good leans here on a Tuesday. Marina Rodriguez is back in there against Verna Jandiroba here. When you look at Rodriguez now, small favorite, not a huge favorite here. Do you think this is a live dog scenario with Jandiroba?
I do, and noticeably her price dropped. So Jandiroba was a much bigger favorite or a bigger underdog, when she opened, and her price came down a lot. And I was a little surprised by that. I think Rodriguez is probably the bigger name, to be honest. I know I've backed her in the past. But in this case, once I lined up the performance metrics, I saw advantages across the board for Jandiroba, not just on the ground, which is glaringly obvious, but also a little bit on the feet. She's a little more crisp with her hands. And so I hope that she takes it down. I hope she changes levels because Rodriguez has been very hesitant to go to the ground and has not performed well there. So I think that in a 3-round fight, that's going to favor us. I'm going to go with the grappler underdog in this case.
Yeah, we're still plus money right now, plus $1.20 on Verna. Let's get to Kennedy Nzechukwu against Devin Clark here. Obviously, Nzechukwu is a guy with big frame. Devin Clark is going to be the shorter guy in there against Kennedy. What do you make of this? Too big a price tag at minus $1.90?
No, I don't think so. I think the theme tonight is that styles make fights. And the style here is that Devin Clark is going to be reaching and running uphill for those takedowns. And if he doesn't get them, he's going to have his chin get tested, I think, frequently. And so those takedowns, although frequent, his success rate is actually not very good. And the defense of Nzechukwu is very good. And so if he stuffs those early takedowns, by the way, add in an 8-inch reach differential. Right. Not to mention the height difference. Like, he is going to look like he's in a different weight class facing a smaller Devin Clark who's chasing him around the cage, hoping for a takedown. And I think that's just a bad storyline at light heavyweight. That might be okay at bantamweight or featherweight, where eventually you get the guy down. But at light heavyweight, you're going to take some damage on the way in. And that might be too much for Clark.
Got about a minute to go. I did want to ask you what potentially could be fight of the night in Drew Dober against Matt Frevola here. We don't expect this one to hit the cards, but what are the numbers showing you, Dober, right now? Oh, about a $2 betting favorite here.
Yeah, this one's interesting. I'm not sure where the price is going to land or where my bet's going to land. I think it arguably could be a little closer than the prices say, a little bit more value on Frevola. But first of all, to your point, 13 knockdowns scored between these two lightweights.
Wow.
Now, Frevola is more damaged. He's taken more knockdowns, but he also hits harder on a per strike basis. And so tons of heavy hands here, but also two competent guys. They do like to mix in wrestling. I think Frevola has a slight advantage there. So that's why I'm seeing potential value on the dog.
And again, follow Reed Kuhn at Fightnomics and see what the menu is going to look like for UFC 288. Reed, I can't wait. I know it's going to be good. Enjoy the fights, my friend. All right, we're going to come back, go to Chicago next. Jordan Sherwood up next year on First Strike. We are back. First strike here on VSiN. Dave Ross here in Las Vegas at Circus Sportsbook. Always great to go back to the second city. Catch up with our guy, Jordan Sherwood. You can follow him on Twitter as I do at Wood on ESPN 1000. And if you just follow Jordan as I do on Twitter, you'll see that it says MMA aficionado. That's such a great word, Jordan, to describe you. An advisor for Fat Jack Sports. And, of course, the host of the Unnamed MMA Pod. And on said Unnamed MMA Pod, you had on one of the co-headliners, if you will, in the co-main event here in Belal Muhammad, Chicago's own, taking on Gilbert Burns. And you guys talked about a lot of things. After the conversation, do you feel better about Belal's chances as a dog against Gil, or do you feel worse?
I feel a lot better. And I feel a lot better because, this is a guy that's, first off, obviously he's surging. 4 wins in a row after the accidental eye poke, no contest against Leon Edwards. And the way that he's winning fights, the fact that he did go, yes, against an older Damian Maia, but, kept the fight standing, wasn't threatened by any groundwork. Then he outstruck Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Anytime you do that, that's impressive. And then obviously I think an exclamation point with the finish over the previously unbeaten Sean Brady the last time we saw Belal. But the fact is that mentally and physically, he's been preparing himself for a 5-round fight, for a headlining fight, for potentially a championship fight. And yes, he doesn't get it per se in taking a fight now against Gilbert Burns, and it was put together rather quickly, but nobody else was accepting fights. And he talked about that. He wanted to fight Colby Covington, wasn't offered to him. He wanted to fight Kamaru Usman, wasn't offered to him. He wanted to fight Leon Edwards, wasn't offered to him. So he's making the best of, in my opinion, a difficult situation. And because he's been preparing training-wise for a 5-round fight, Gilbert's taken this kind of, rather quickly on short notice. And the fact, too, that Belal Muhammad's never been submitted. And the fact, too, that, yes, he has evolved as a striker, as has Gilbert Burns, and Burns has got some power. I like his chances as the underdog here entering tomorrow night or on to Saturday night.
And Jordan, that's the thing too, is that normally in a co-main event like this, that a short notice fight just thrown together, you normally don't see it be for a non-title bout here, 5 rounds, right? That's got to be to Belal's advantage, right? And again, you look at it is juiced here, 4.5 rounds. Is the pathway to victory for Belal that he extends this for a guy that just fought a month ago, extend him into the deep waters and get into the gas tank of Gil, which can be problematic at times? Is that the method of victory here? And you can get really juicy 2-1 if you like Belal by decision.
Well, isn't that the most likely scenario? Yes. Belal is coming off of that TKO finish of Brady, but prior to that, he's a 3-round dominant decision, pathway. 16 of his 22 mixed martial arts wins have come on the judges' scorecards. And the way he does it is he outboxes you. And then when it becomes frustrating, he has a variety of different ways to be able to take you down. He's not just a straight double leg or a single leg. He does tremendous amounts of chain wrestling. He does tremendous amounts of those, different types of things to get the fight to the ground. And it comes a variety of ways. And also, I think Gilbert Burns is going to be accepting of those takedowns because he's so well-versed and so comfortable off of his back. But I think the time on the back, the grinding nature that Belal Muhammad, and then you're right, the cardio has been in question before with Gilbert Burns. It's never with Belal. I like what Belal has in store, especially now at the underdog price here on a Tuesday.
If that's a conflicting fight, when you look at the main event here with Aljo against King Henry and his return, it is kind of baffling to see the way that the market opened and where it's gone now, right? It opens up as Aljo as a favorite. It swings all the way to Cejudo. And right now, as we speak on a Tuesday, he still is minus $1.15 here as the betting favorite against Aljo, minus $1.05. What do you make of the main event? And is this one that you think does eventually hit the cards?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. What is Henry Cejudo going to look like 3 years after, he decided to kind of unceremoniously retire?
Mm-hmm.
Credit where credit's due. The guy has an impressive career. His bounce back after Demetrius Johnson knocked him off to claim the flyweight championship and then, go up and win the bantamweight title and do it against, impressive guys with the wins over Dillashaw at flyweight and then obviously Marlon Moraes and Dominic Cruz. Not the same Dominic Cruz, but certainly an impressive victory over Dominic Cruz. But he's been out of the game for 3 years. And, Aljamain Sterling is such an interesting cat because Look, he was decisively losing that fight to Peter Yan before the illegal DQ. Then he comes back, looks brilliant against Yan, but how good is Yan? Because Yan, since that fight, look, the Sandhagen fight, the Sean O'Malley fight, most recently what we've seen, and then Sterling's most recent performance. Don't want to poo-poo it, but like DJ Dillashaw was injured, and he was, and the shoulder it came out well documented. So here's what I'll say: I think the athleticism from Sterling should not be ignored. He's a very difficult guy to prepare for. He's long, he's lengthy, he's awkward. And I love his camp. Ray Longo, Matt Serra, get guys ready. And I love the fact, too, that he's Matt Frevola, I think, also is out of that camp. Mm-hmm. So training alongside, he's earlier on in the card, I think. But who's the benefit to Aljamain Sterling? If I'm picking somebody today, it's Sterling because he's the dog. But quite frankly, I could change my mind. It's such an interesting matchup come fight night and side with Cejudo because it's hard to pick against him.
Yeah, these numbers keep going back and forth a little bit, and it's come back a little bit. Henry, I saw as high as a -$20 back to -$15. Sneaky little moves. But you see you're getting a lot of two-way action here because the betting market, I think, is conflicted by this main event for a lot of the points you just laid out. Again, in your bio, it says MMA aficionado. I've gone almost a full hour, and we have not discussed Braxton Smith against Parker Porter, but you have. You like this fight. You see an angle on this fight. Tell me what intrigues you about this fight.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got Braxton Smith, the guy that made his mixed martial arts debut back in 2014, then took 8 years off, came back, and has won 5 fights in a row. Look, against kind of like tomato cans, but he's done it. All those victories haven't lasted more than 2 minutes. He's got a strong overhand right. He's a big, enormous dude, and he hits with a ton of power. The thing is that I think Parker Porter's seen that. He's seen that before. And granted, he's been stopped, in the first round a couple of times against Jalton Almeida and Justin Tafa. He's 3-3 in the UFC. This is low-level heavyweights at their best. But I think Parker Porter has seen a guy like this before. And if he just avoids those first couple of minutes, it's Parker Porter's fight to lose. I think takedowns are going to happen. I think he's going to grind this fight out, make it dirty, make it like a Martin Boudet fight. We just saw him win, kind of in a non-impressive fashion against Jake Collier last week. So I like Parker Porter. He's an underdog right now. I think people are chiming in on Smith being a first-round finisher. Porter, suspect chin, but I think Porter smart enough to avoid the overhand right. I like the over in the fight. And I like Porter just to grind out, get a win maybe in the third round via submission or go to the judges' scorecards and win 2-1.
So glad you brought up that fight last week. It was not aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but it was for the wallet because I know we were on the right side of that one. And again, you like the plus money here, plus $1.40 for the over right now because, again, 1.5 is all you have to get with these big boys out there. Certainly the experts believe, or at least the marketplace says, that maybe the under's in play, but I'm picking up what Jordan's putting down to that plus money to get over 7.5 minutes. I did want to get to maybe arguably for non-title bouts or 5-round fights. The one most highly anticipated is Drew Dober against the steamroller Matt Frevola here. What do you make of this matchup, and is there any way this one hits the cards?
I mean, obviously it certainly could. We've seen that, a couple of times in Drew Dober's career and Matt Frevola's career. But I just think Matt Frevola has changed up his game plan where it's kind of a kill or be killed mentality. He's going out there to try and either finish people or, look, he got caught by 7 seconds in the Terrence McKinney fight. But after that, look, he hasn't been intimidated to go back into the pocket. The issue with that is against Drew Dober. The guy's got dynamite in both hands, and he's a guy that can go out there and get the finish rather quickly. Speaking of McKinney, that 1-round fight was amazing. The fact that Drew Dober came back twice in that fight to get the knockout. So I think both guys match up very well from a wrestling standpoint. I think maybe Dober a little bit more powerful, Frevola a little bit more grit and grind. But again, too, I like the fact that he's training alongside Aljamain Sterling under the tutelage of Ray Longo and Matt Serra. So I think it'll be a fun fight. But I do believe, as you just said, Dave, both guys are finishers. The styles make fights. One guy's running into the other guy's fist at some point and is getting knocked out. Very
quickly, only about a minute to go. Are you as fascinated by seeing Kron Gracie, speaking of layoffs like Henry Cejudo, back inside the octagon? Whenever you have a Gracie in there, it's MMA royalty here. He is a dog against Charles Jourdain. Can he evolve his game to where he can be proficient with the hands? Or is this, hey, when you got a Gracie, we go down to the mat, and that's the way I want to win this fight?
Well, but he didn't do that the last time we saw him several years ago against Cub Swanson, and he got yelled at by his grandfather. And so Kron Gracie is taking this fight to the ground immediately against Charles Air Jordan. He does not want to be on the feet whatsoever. So Gracie, maybe to revert back to what he knows best, might be worth looking at.
You sometimes just stick to what you know, right? That's what you know, Kron. Jordan, appreciate it as always, my friend. Enjoy the great second city of Chicago and UFC 288. That's going to put a bow on this edition. Want to thank Rob Moreno and certainly Britton Hess for doing a great job putting this show together. Enjoy the fights. We'll see you next week right here on VSiN.